All right, so here's a question. Should Christians wear masks out in public or in our church services? This is one of those issues that has become suddenly a political debate. And does the Bible have anything to say about that? Many of our churches are opening up once again, and I know that some Christians are on one side of the issue and other Christians are on the other side of the issue, and it seems like it's causing fights not just outside of the church, but even inside of the church. So, should a Christian wear a mask? Let's talk about that. Now, the Bible obviously doesn't say anything about wearing masks, but it does say something about areas of conscience. I call these gray areas, not black and white areas. The Bible has a lot to say about stuff that is black and white, like don't commit adultery, right? Or go make disciples, or there's only one way to heaven through Jesus. These are black and white issues. But the issue of wearing a mask is a gray issue. Some of you might not think that it is, but it really is. It's not a salvation issue, and that puts it in the gray area. And so how should we think about the gray areas? Well, we get a clue in Romans chapter 14 where Paul says this. He says, accept other believers who are weak in faith and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. Now, I'll let you read that whole chapter for yourself. In fact, I really encourage you to read it for yourself and fact check what I'm about to say. But the issue is basically this. In the early church, we had Jews, who were Christians, followers of Jesus, and then you had Gentiles who were Christians, followers of Jesus. And so these two cultures didn't mix really well. I mean, there was a lot of area for fighting over the non-essentials. And one of those was the matter of eating food sacrificed to idols. So what Paul basically is teaching in Romans chapter 14 is idols are nothing, and so it's no big deal if you wanted to eat meat that was sacrificed to an idol, because that idol's not a god after all, and it doesn't really matter. Well, the Jewish Christians in their conscience had a hard time with this because they grew up thinking that, well, no, you're not supposed to eat meat sacrificed to idols. Whereas the people who came from a pagan background or a Gentile Christian, they were like, it's no big deal. I've been eating this kind of meat forever. And by the way, it wasn't just a matter of eating, it was a matter of finances, because this meat was cheaper than the other meat. So for a Gentile believer, they were just like, hey, this is just good stewardship of my money. And for a Jewish believer, they were like, no, that is just morally wrong. So what did Paul teach them to do? A good summary is in verse 12 and 13. It says, yes, each of us will give a personal account to God. So let's stop condemning each other. Decide instead to live in such a way that you will not cause another believer to stumble and fall. And then in verse 19, he says, so then let us aim for harmony in the church and try to build each other up. Here's what I think Paul is saying, and I think it applies to the situation about wearing masks in our churches today. He's saying, extend grace to one another in the gray areas. This is really important. Why are you going to try to condemn another believer for wearing a mask or for not wearing a mask? Here's how I summarize the issue. Extend grace in the gray areas so you can take a stand in the black and white areas. And this is where the issue goes beyond the wearing of face masks, because in another year, it's going to be another issue. In another 10 years, it's going to be some other issue. I think as followers of Jesus in the church, we have to figure out which areas are gray areas, and we need to learn from Romans 14. We need to extend grace one another to build up the church, to create peace and harmony within the church. Let's be gracious when it comes to the gray areas so that we can take a stand for ourselves, for our kids, for the people who are trying to find out what really matters. We can take a stand on the areas that are black and white.